the third noble truth, and Joy started us off last week exploring it. And so I'm going to continue this this journey that we're on around the third noble truth. And I thought, because one of the ways that we suffer is when we think that things should not change, right? This is this idea of forgetting in a really felt sense way about impermanence. And I thought I'd read a poem, start off with a poem by Octavia Butler called Earthseed, that is such a beautiful reminder, I think, about change. So it goes like this. Here we are, energy, mass, life, shaping life, mind, shaping mind, God, shaping God. Consider we are born not with purpose, but with potential. All that you touch, you change. And all that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. All that you touch, you change. And all that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. It amazes me how quickly I forget that. In a heartbeat, I can forget that. When we look at the third noble truth, one of the questions that we're asking, and Joy talked about this, is how do we cut the ties or the roots of suffering? How do we stop feeding the suffering? I like that picture in my mind of like feeding the monster of suffering. That we can do a lot to feed this suffering, and how do we stop that? One of the things that the Buddha spoke about, and I think it's reflected in Octavia Butler's poem, is he talked about the conditionality of suffering, and that there is this causality that happens to create suffering. Everything, if I'm suffering in this moment, there are things that have led up to me suffering in this moment. And the way that the Buddha talks about that, the words or the phrase for it is dependent co-arising, which really means causes and conditions, basically. And he likens this to water flowing over land. Lakes overflow, which fill rivers. The rivers fill the sea. The tides of the sea rise, swelling the rivers, which then swell the lakes. So there's this constant flow happening in this phrase, in this idea of dependent co-arising, of one thing overflowing into the next, overflowing into the next, and into the next. And so in a sense, the question is, if we're looking at the third noble truth, is how do I stop that flow? How do I put a stop to that? And it's not a forever stop either. And Joy touched on this as well. And this is one of the teachings that gives me hope, because the way that I understand enlightenment, and I like the way that Joseph Goldstein reminds us about it, that enlightenment isn't this forever kind of experience. I mean, maybe it is for the Buddha, but for most of us normal human beings, it's moments. It's moments of liberation, moments of freedom from suffering. And in those moments that we do stop feeding the monster or adding water to the flow, when we can sink into that feeling, it's what gives us the encouragement to keep on going on this path, to keep sitting our butts down on that cushion, or to keep practicing this eightfold noble path. I was watching my dog Lucy last night. The cat was wandering around the house, and Lucy is a beagle, and so she has a very fixed perception of cats. And if you've ever seen a beagle, right, they do that pointing thing. Their whole body goes straight, the tail is straight. And so Lucy experiences this fixed perception of the cat, that somehow the cat means danger. And so again and again and again, the cat comes into her space. The cat is just laying there, cuddling, doing whatever she does. And Lucy goes into full beagle mode of freezing and pointing and stalking. And I was thinking as I was watching her, and I was laughing because, of course, it wasn't me. But I was thinking of how that's a beautiful example of fixed perception. You know, Lucy's perception of the cat is fixed. It's unchanging. And as long as her perception is fixed, she suffers, right? She can't rest. She can't relax because she's always on guard, watching out for this cat. And this cat means her no harm. But Lucy doesn't get that because in her mind, all she sees is danger. And if she could just allow herself to let go, I mean, she's a beagle, so that would be very hard. But if, right, if she could allow herself to let go, she would have a moment of freedom. She would be able to take this deep breath and flop down on the couch and really see very clearly, right, very clearly that this cat means no harm to her. Because she'd be able to like take off the glasses that are kind of shading her view, her delusional view, actually. I mean, that is a misperception on her part. But it's based on conditioning. It's based, right, in her own kind of makeup of generations of other beagles who have like bred into her that cats are a danger. And so she just can't let go. And because of that, she'll continue to suffer. There is a teacher, Geshen Greenwood, who talks about the third noble truth. And the way that he speaks of suffering is in these traditional ways, right, of craving. And if we can get rid of craving, then we can end our suffering. And he brings in delusion here. He says, I think it's more useful to say that it's not craving only, but also delusion that gives rise to craving and then clinging. And it's all of these negative emotional qualities that arise from ignorance. And when I say ignorance, I mean a misunderstanding of who we are, a misperception, a delusion. And that colors what we see in front of us. I think that I know I've talked about this before at other times, but in the world that we're living in, it's really easy. It's easy for me, I'll speak for myself, to get stuck in fixed perceptions, in wanting other people to believe what I believe, in wanting other people to feel what I feel. I felt it this morning. I was having a conversation with Jack, my husband, and we were talking about what happened, to Adam Toledo, this 13-year-old in Chicago. And Jack was seeing it with a lot of subtlety, but the way that he was seeing it wasn't exactly the way that I was seeing it. And I could feel, me just wanting to make his view be mine. I could even I could feel it in my chest. I could feel myself leaning forward, wanting his view to be exactly like mine, that somehow that would make everything okay. And that it doesn't cause him any suffering. He's seeing things very clearly. They might be a little bit different from how I'm seeing them, but he's not seeing them in a delusional way. I'm the one who's suffering because I'm trying in my heart to make us have the same perception. So when that happens for me, here's the other piece around the third noble truth. The way that we cut the cord to suffering is we have to see it. We have to be aware that the suffering is happening. I mean, how often do we suffer and not even realize until we're so far gone in the suffering that we're suffering, right? Like, how hot does the coal have to get before we're like, oh, this is too much, right? What if we could actually catch that when it's just like lukewarm, right? Then we could cut those cords so much sooner and ease a lot of suffering. What I was seeing when this was happening with me and Jack this morning is that if I wasn't seeing the suffering that was happening within me, I was going to also cause him suffering, because there's right speech and right action that come into play around this fixed perception. And if I'm trying to force my view on him, then I'm going to say or do something that causes him pain, that hurts him. So it's not even this third noble truth is in our individualistic society, and in a lot of our meditation spaces, we might concentrate on how we're causing our own suffering. And it's just as, or even more important, that we look at how our actions are causing suffering in other people, in other beings. So seeing is the beginning, right? Seeing, and one of the ways that we can see is by feeling into the body, by learning what our cues are that tell us we're suffering. And I do think that this shift, so there was something else I was reading that was talking about, I was thinking about how our mainstream culture, our white kind of mainstream culture, is so individualistic. And that there are so many other cultures in our country and in other countries that have such a more collective nature about them, that really are putting the good of a group or the needs of other beings as of prime importance. And I think that it's a very important teaching for me to be looking at these days of how is it that my actions are causing another's suffering, and how can I cut those ropes? How can I stop feeding that monster, or Mara, right? Mara. And it begins with seeing. So I'll end with one more poem. This one is by Dana or Donna Falds. I don't know how actually. It's Danna. And the poem is called Whatever Doesn't Serve. What weight can you put down right now? What weight can you put down right now? Willingly relinquishing the pointed quills of guilt or judgment. What burden of the heart can lift? What dark corner can be lit, the candle flickering at first and then burning bright? With the next breath, let it go. That old story you've told yourself 1,000,000 times. Whatever doesn't serve you on this path of truth, leave it behind. Offer this one gift, the simple sacrifice that in the giving sets you free to fully live. That in the giving sets you free to fully live.